Hello there. So I'm trying something very different today. I asked you guys to share your unpopular opinions about Gilmore Girls, and I would respond or react to them. And normally I try to make my videos well researched. As in, I go back and I look at all the scenes, I analyze it, I look at different sides of the situation. And this case, I'm going to not be doing that at all. I'm going purely off of feeling and I did not prepare for these opinions, so I didn't go back and try to refresh my memory. And it's possible that in the future I may change my opinion if I ever decide to go back and revisit the subject. But right now, it's just having fun responding to your opinions, and let's go. Unpopular but factual opinion. Taylor Dozy cared about Stars Hollow the most and sacrificed his popularity and sanity to make sure it ran like a historically preserved tight ship. He was the ringmaster in a circus, the only adult in the room. Yeah, I kind of agree with this one. I think that Taylor Dozy really cared about Stars Hollow. In my video on Taylor, I kind of compared him to Michael Scott from The Office. And I think I've sort of adopted that headcanon now that he has been slowly driven insane by the job. And it's because he loves the town so much that he has become so tyrannical. It's his passion for it. It doesn't mean that his behavior is unproblematic or that it's necessarily good. I think he still says and does some things that are troubling.
Oh, this isn't about the fascists who, by the way, had their faults, but their parks were spotless.
But I do think he loves Stars Hollow. I don't know if I feel like he's the only adult in the room, because I think he has been sort of driven mad by the job, but I've definitely changed my view on Taylor. I kind of like him more than I used to. I don't know if these are considered an unpopular opinion or not, but I tended to enjoy the storylines that revolved around the side characters. And I was more invested in what was going on with them than Lorelai or Rory. Lane, Kirk, Paris, Sookie, Michelle, etc. My other possible unpopular opinion is while I appreciated the storyline Rory got in the revival, I felt like Emily's was the best one and the one that felt most complete. All right. So, I guess with the first opinion, it's more of a preference. I think it varied for me. There was some times where I liked the side storylines more, and other times where I was more invested in what was happening with Lorelai and Rory. I think it just depends. Like for example, Lane's storyline with the band, I couldn't find myself that invested in it, but I was invested in, I guess, Lane's relationship with her mom and that storyline. I guess it depended. The revival. Yeah, I would absolutely 100% agree. And I think it might be a popular opinion, but let me know. But I think that a lot of people feel that Emily's storyline was really good in the revival. And I know that Kelly Bishop talked about the revival and how she felt about Emily's conclusion, and she really liked it a lot. And she felt that ASP, Amy Sherman Palladino, did a really good job with sort of portraying a widow, the grief process, and moving on. And that was well done. And I thought it was really beautiful and I loved it. I hated any time there was a celebration on the show and they would waste a lot of food. Usually, Lorelai and Rory would brag about how much they could eat. They would buy or order ridiculous amounts of food and immediately would have a huge argument and leave without eating anything. I hated this waste. I also hate wastefulness. I guess I would have to think of a specific example where they have an argument and they just leave a bunch of food on the table, and I can think of scenarios where there usually is a lot of food on the table and nothing gets eaten. I guess they could have had scenes where we see sort of empty plates or food being put away or actually being eaten. Yeah, no, I don't like the waste either. I think this is an unpopular opinion, judging from other channels and comments, but I can't stand Kirk. I don't find his quirkiness funny at all. He's annoying and a needy man-child. Also, I don't remember him ever smiling in the main show. Yeah, I don't know if Kirk has ever smiled. I don't remember him smiling, and I respect this opinion. I love Kirk. I am a fan of him. I also understand why people don't like Kirk. And I've read one comment which I liked is that Kirk is a cartoon character. He's the least realistic one. He's there for just slapstick comedy, and not everybody likes that. It's not everybody's thing. And for some people, it feels like it really takes away from the realism of the show. But for me, I don't feel that the show is realistic to me. I kind of see it as a breed between a sitcom and a drama show. So yes, Kirk is a nuisance, and Kirk does make things more difficult for other people, so I do understand that, but personally, I'm a fan of Kirk. My unpopular opinion is that Lane should have ended up with Brian. He was so sweet and supportive of her, and they had a great bond. Yeah, I kind of like this one. If I had to choose between Brian, Dave, and Zach, I would choose Dave. But I thought that Brian was adorable. I thought he was a cutie. And yeah, it would have been really interesting to see how Brian and Lane would have worked together as a couple. I could also see the audience not liking Brian and Lane together because Brian was presented as someone who's more, I guess, nerdy in a sense. But I really liked his storyline with how he wrote a song for Lane. I thought it was adorable. And yeah, I thought he was really cute. Super unpopular opinion. I think that Zach was a good match for Lane, and I actually like him better than Dave. Zach was a supportive husband to Lane when she was pregnant and when she had the twins, and I appreciated the unexpected friendship he developed with Mrs. Kim when she moved in to help with the twins. On the contrary, Dave was very sneaky, and his ability to lie so easily to Mrs. Kim was a bit of a red flag. That is a unpopular opinion, I think. But I did prefer Dave for Lane, and I think that well, I guess I do agree with the fact that I think Zach was a good husband and father. We don't see any scenes showing that he's a bad father. He seems to be very supportive. He does seem to love her. So I do think he was a good husband to Lane. And he did develop a friendship with Mrs. Kim. I think it's hard to compare Dave's relationship with Lane and Zach's relationship with Lane, specifically when it comes to Mrs. Kim, because Lane is in a different place of her life when she's with Zach. Because by the time that Zach is with her, she's already moved out. She's an adult. She has asserted her independence and Mrs. Kim has already experienced what it's like to lose her daughter. When she was seeing Dave, she was still in the household and she had to sort of sneak around. And Mrs. Kim was not yet aware of how her daughter truly felt. And that break that Lane had with Mrs. Kim, I think, was really significant for their relationship and what has allowed Mrs. Kim to evolve and change and to soften her relationship with Lane and how she treats her. So by the time that Zach came around, we had a very different Mrs. Kim. So I don't think it's quite fair to compare Mrs. Kim's relationship with Zach and Dave because they're coming from a different side. And we don't really know what it would have been like for Zach if he was dating Lane back when she was in high school. I also want to briefly talk about the deception element because I have seen this argument being brought up before that Dave did lie to Mrs. Kim and he was deceptive with Mrs. Kim. And for me, I didn't have an issue with it primarily because I did feel like Mrs. Kim was in the wrong. Of course, a parent has a right to parent their child how they wish, but I felt that Mrs. Kim's restrictions were just way too harsh and her leash on Lane was just way too tight that I had so much sympathy for Lane. And I felt like Dave's deception was only giving Lane just a little bit of freedom and a little bit of space to explore herself and to just I guess, have a life of a normal teenager. I also feel like his deception didn't feel malicious, that what he was really doing was trying to give himself a chance because he knew that without trying to be at all deceptive at all, that Mrs. Kim would never give him a chance, would never try to get to know him. So all he really wanted was a way for Mrs. Kim to get to know him and to find out that he's not a bad guy and for Mrs. Kim to let Lane have a little bit of a life. So because of that, I felt like it was not malicious deception. And again, I think it is primarily because Mrs. Kim's actions and her restrictions, I felt like were way too harsh.
And for the last time, the name is Rory!
I think hating on and criticizing Lorelai and Rory has been a bandwagon that too many people jump on, sometimes without valid reasons. While both characters are certainly not flawless and do things that can be considered immoral from time to time on the show, that's literally the essence of Gilmore Girls. Lorelai and Rory are far away from perfect, but you could still understand where they're coming from and why they act the way they do. All the quirkiness and comedic effects of the show create the misleading effect that they're somehow supposed to be perfect, but really they're only human and are trying their best. I'm not talking about the revival though. Yeah, so this is a really interesting opinion because I think it touches upon how the audience interacts with the media and I guess just different psychological effects. I think that once a person starts criticizing a certain character, is that once there's more criticism, other people feel more comfortable in sharing their opinion. So it's not necessarily that people change their opinion, but that once they see others doing it, they feel more safe and comfortable in doing it as well. Of course, it also comes down to the fact that some people didn't have a strong opinion and then they see all these reactions and they sort of get swayed by the opinion and change their mind. So the other thing that I think is interesting when it comes to sort of the bandwagon of hatred is that there's a bit of a dogpiling effect, I think, sometimes where once you don't like a character, it's so much easier to just start dogpiling all the other things you don't like about them. So the behavior that you might not have a problem with in other characters are just seen as just a small human flaw becomes a bigger issue with the characters you don't like. I think the bandwagon element is interesting, and I also think that there's like a effect when it comes to, and this is not just Gilmore Girls, but with TV shows in general, of like the hate train for a certain character that starts to rise. And then, of course, there's that counter response to that. So then you see a lot of responses and reactions from people who are like, hey, maybe they're not that bad. And I think I've seen this with Rory because I think that when the show was on air, there wasn't as much hatred for Rory. She was generally liked. And then many years later, there's been a feeling of, oh gosh, Rory was awful, an annoying millennial. And I think now I've seen more of a reaction from people that there's a defense of Rory and an explanation for her behavior and not necessarily judging her as harshly. I don't know how I feel about this, honestly. I think that the criticisms of Lorelai and Rory, I think, are valid. Sometimes they bring up good points. I personally don't have a hatred towards either Lorelai or Rory. And I am critical of some of their actions, some of their behaviors, and they do have some behaviors that we would consider to be immoral and that hurt other people. But as a whole, I don't hate the characters. And about the comedic and quirky effect and the aura that it creates around these characters. And yeah, and I would agree. I think that we look at a protagonist differently, and I mentioned this in one video when I talked about Rory in Paris, but we look at a protagonist differently as we would an antihero or an antagonist or the villain. So then when a show presents someone as someone who should be likable, but they have these problematic behavior, then we kind of judge them harshly. I think that the vibe of the show, I guess the aura of the show, the quirkiness, the comedy, like you mentioned, does kind of make you feel like, oh, these are presented as very likable characters. And so the bad behavior that's displayed then kind of creates this dissonance in the audience mind of, well, we're supposed to like these characters. That's what the show seems to imply, but why is this person lying? Why is this person cheating? Why is this person hurting somebody else? And so I think that kind of the fall from grace is much harsher when the person is put on the pedestal, so to speak. I think Rory got a lot of hate for making decisions I could see an actual 19-year-old making. Her fall from grace was realistic, and a lot of people need to put that into perspective. Same with Dean. Both of them got a lot of hate, but showed that they grew from their mistakes. Some mistakes, at least. Rory's still a lying cheater, and I always hate her for that. So this, I think, ties a little bit into the previous unpopular opinion. I do think that sometimes Rory's decisions were judged a little too harshly, also factoring her age, but also some criticisms and some of the hatred is, I think, valid, namely the cheating. I think most people just don't like the cheating, and it's really hard to defend. I know that some people have argued that, well, Rory isn't really as at fault because Dean was being deceptive. He lied to Rory. He implied that he was breaking up with Lindsay.
It's over. We both feel it.
For me, I feel like there are some scenes to suggest that Rory should have known better, namely that before he even tells her that, there's a scene where they almost kiss. And it's kind of clear that if Tom didn't enter the room, they might have kissed. And this is before Dean tells Rory that he's breaking up with Lindsay. So there's some evidence to suggest that she might have ended up cheating even if Dean wasn't being as deceptive. So, and I do think that Dean is more at fault for that situation. So one could also argue that, well, she was at that age, she made this one mistake and then she grew from it. But then, of course, we see in the revival that she doesn't. Dean, on the other hand, we see that he's doing well. We don't know what his life has turned out. I guess it's nice to think that perhaps he has reformed as a person, he has grown up. Yeah, I see that some criticisms are a little harsh and other criticisms are fair. I don't think anyone gives credit to Rory and her need to be her own person. When she chose to drop out of Yale because she wasn't pursuing journalism anymore, she was genuinely exploring her options and trying to figure out who she was. Feels like everyone, her mom, her grandparents, her entire fandom, is angry at her for being lost and confused and trying to figure herself out. I argue that she needed to drop out and try to make her own choices. She had a right to mess up and learn from her mistakes. The show positions everything from Lorelai's point of view, so we all think like Lorelai, meaning that Rory made the wrong choice and just needed to get back in school. So with this particular opinion, there is a response to it, which I want to read because it factors into my view of this opinion. I actually think you have a point, except that Rory didn't handle it properly. If she literally said, I need some time to decide if I'm really on the right path, and I feel like I should take a semester off to evaluate and explore my options, that would have been fine. It's because her actions weren't a thoughtful response to what Mitchum said about her. I think I'm a little bit more inclined to agree with the second opinion. I do absolutely believe that it was fine for Rory to take time off school. And she brought up good arguments when she was talking to Lorelai. She mentioned that why waste money? I don't know what I want to do. Why would I be going to school? And this is just something that I think has become more and more prevalent with the last two generations about how like college is a scam. Really, we've been lied to. That why would you waste so much money on a career that you're not sure you want to do, a career that you're forced to choose when you're 18 years old, and then graduate and be like, oh crap, what am I doing with my life?
My goal is not to wake up at 40 with the bitter realization that I've wasted my life in a job I hate because I was forced to decide on a career in my teens.
So her points were valid. Rory was valid in deciding to leave school. Where I have trouble, I think, is the timeline. I think the timeline is what confuses me a little bit because it's not clear to me how much time has passed from Mitchum's feedback and her decision to drop out. It could have been weeks, possibly, but I guess the fact that we're not really shown her thought process and the fact that this is the type of character to make pro and con lists, to think things through, that it would feel a little out of character for her to not think things through. The one scene that we're really given is Rory sitting in a classroom and looking out the window because she feels like she's questioning her choices. And I guess it feels like a little abrupt and too fast. I think a lot of fans don't really take issue necessarily with her decision to drop out, but the speed with which she made that choice and how reasoned it seemed, how many options she explored. If she spoke to anybody about this, she spoke to Logan. You know, you would talk to maybe your boyfriend when you're making such a big decision, or your best friend, or a guidance counselor, or at least talk it out. Think of these ideas. It seems like a very abrupt decision. And I think that's where the fandom, I think, has a gripe with that choice. But yeah, I think you're absolutely right in the fact that Rory has a right to choose what she wants to do. And she has a right to not go to school if she feels like it's not the right decision for her. And Lorelai was being very pushy and saying that you must go back to school. It's the kind of scenario where we would have been more satisfied if we understood, I guess, Rory's thought process and what she thought through in her mind when she made that decision. I had a thought. Is Rory such a bad friend to Lane, whereas Lane is the perfect friend to Rory, as the fandom often says? I'm not so sure. Yeah, I kind of sort of touched upon this in my conversation with my friend on Rory and Lane. And when I went back to rewatch the scenes with Rory and Lane, the impression that I got is that in the beginning, in the early seasons, it feels like Rory makes a bad impression as a friend because, of course, the first impression is the most influential one. And early on, we do see some conflict between Rory and Lane, and we see that Rory kind of disregards Lane when she starts dating Dean. There are times when she's not listening to her. But as the show goes on, we do see the fact that Rory is a very supportive friend to Lane. And I think that that initial impression that we get from Rory is what kind of taints the fandom's image of her. And yeah, I think I also cut out a lot of that conversation that I had with my friend. That conversation was like an hour and a half long and the video is only 20 minutes. So we did talk a lot about how Rory kind of gives space for Lane to be herself. Both Rory and Lorelai kind of allow Lane to have her life. They let her eat the food she wants to eat. Rory tries to buy CDs for Lane when Lane can't do that.
I found the greatest record store in the world. It's 10 minutes from your school, and I'm wondering how much you love me.
Address.
She sneaks in things for Lane when Lane is grounded. She even climbs the window to talk to Lane. She helps Lane dye her hair. So she does play the supportive best friend role with Lane a lot. So she does try to give Lane some sense of normalcy given her life with her mom. She's not a perfect friend by any means, but I don't think that she's terrible. Unpopular opinion. Rory shouldn't have gone to Yale or even Harvard. She should have gone to a simpler university and become star journalist. Just been more grounded. Another comment said, I agree. And she would have met people more akin to her Stars Hollow circle as opposed to Logan and the elite. I mean, if she could have gone to a simpler university. I think it could have been one venue to explore. I'm not necessarily opposed to this opinion. It could have worked. I think that for a show, so I guess taking it from like a focus on a show perspective and drama, I think that it created more drama for Rory to go to a place like Harvard and Yale and to meet people who are different from Stars Hollow. So it created more of a contrast. I think it made sense for the show to go into the Yale or Ivy League route because it gave Rory a new environment, it exposed her to different kinds of people. So if we're talking about Rory as potentially a real person, then going to a simpler university, I think kind of could make sense. I mean, I think we all kind of maybe realized that the college doesn't always matter. And yeah, some people make connections at Ivy League, some people don't, and it would not have made a difference where they went to school. And some people drop out and they become super successful. Some people go to a community college, they become super successful. So the pedigree of the university doesn't always matter. So as a real person, yeah, potentially Rory could have done well. I mean, not in print journalism, but I think from a show perspective, I think it kind of gave more entertainment to have her go to Yale. I think Marty was the best match for Rory, not taking the Lucy drama into consideration because it was so out of character. I don't hate Marty. I know that quite a few people feel like he's a nice guy, and I feel like he kind of falls into that trope if you consider season 7. But before that, I kind of don't feel like he's necessarily in the nice guy category. And sometimes I feel like there's a little bit of a projection, or we kind of put a label on people too quickly because we don't really see him again. If we discount season 7, I don't think we see Marty actually lashing out on Rory or being vindictive towards her. So he does distance himself from Rory when he knows that's not going to work out, which I think is a normal response, but he's not mean to her, or he doesn't act like he's entitled. I guess that's the thing, is that there's a scene where he honestly tells Rory how he feels, and he explains to her why he doesn't want to be around her because of his feelings. And this kind of goes against the nice guy trope because he's not being angry towards her. He's being very honest and sharing the fact that
I know we're friends, and I'm glad we're friends. But I don't want to be just friends anymore. I like you.
I think that for a nice guy, there has to be this element of entitlement. And Marty doesn't really act entitled to me. Was he the best guy for Rory? I don't know about that one. I don't know. I mean, maybe an argument could be made for that. I don't think I have a strong opinion on that. It could have been interesting. But when we look at season 7, I don't know, he's terrible. I think that he kind of really plummets in season 7, and I think he becomes a less likable character. And I'm not gonna, I could defend Marty before season 7, but in season 7, I won't do it. It can't make me do it. I think the Dean Jess love triangle was the worst, not just because I am a Rory and Logan fan, but because both relationships were very high school. If I could pick one, it would be Dean because he treated her well, but I hated the way the love triangle was written. I enjoyed that storyline. Was it good in terms of her behavior or like the people who were getting hurt? No. Obviously, Dean was getting hurt, and it is hard to watch sometimes, but I enjoyed that storyline. I thought it was very gripping for me and entertaining. So, related opinion. I found that arc from season 2 to early season 3, where Dean practically spent the whole season watching Rory fall in love with another boy, so hard to watch. It made me dislike Rory so much, and I never really liked her after that. I know people hate Dean, but I don't understand why so much of the fandom doesn't even sympathize with him here or straight up ignore it completely. In my opinion, I understand why he ended up the way he did due to her betrayal. I got the impression, I could be completely wrong, that even though the fandom hates Dean, they still generally sympathize with him for what happened in season 2. I think that's my impression. Maybe I'm wrong, but I guess that is the impression I walked away from, that his pain is not ignored in season 2. People still dislike Rory for that, but they also hate Dean at the same time. And I think that Rory's actions were really harsh. And yeah, it was hard to watch. So, and which is why I think I'm not a sadist, but it was, I think, an entertaining storyline for that reason, where it created a lot of drama and it kind of did demonstrate, I think, in a somewhat realistic way of what could plausibly happen with teens and with a girl who doesn't assert herself and who doesn't know how to break up with someone. So I think it played out in a way that was kind of realistic, and it was interesting to watch. Is it hard to watch? Was it harsh to Dean? Yes, I think so. I had sympathy for Dean. I felt bad for him, and it was hard for Dean to watch the girl that he likes fall in love with someone else. So yeah. I prefer Jess over Dean. Jess had more in common with Rory. I hated Dean for making Rory dress up like Donna Reed. She's only 16 years old and should never have been asked to play a housewife. I'm only at season 3, episode 5, so I'm not sure I'll come up with more unpopular opinions later. Well, welcome to the show. I hope you are enjoying it. And I see that some people have responded to your comment, noting that Rory chose to dress up. Dean didn't make her. So they are right. So Rory decided to dress up for Dean. She surprised him. And Dean later told her that, hey, by the way, you don't have to do this. You don't have to dress up for me. This was unexpected. So it was 100% Rory's decision to dress up. The preference for Jess over Dean. I do like Jess more than Dean. I think Jess is more interesting as a character, and I also think that Jess and Rory had more in common. Unpopular opinion. Rory and Logan are perfectly suited for each other in the later seasons. They met at the right time, while you, the audience, might not fantasize about a rich trust fund kid, and he might not be suited to your preferences. He was a perfect match for Rory. She would have never chosen a simple guy like Dean or Marty in season 6 through 7 just because she's in a different circle now and wants different things. Plus, I think the writers threw in the proposal for no reason. It was unnecessary. Yeah, I think I agree with this one. I think that actually all of Rory's relationships came at the right time. So I think that Dean was well timed, Jess was well timed for the period that she was going through in her life, and Logan was also well timed. That she met Logan at the point in her life that it made sense, and Logan as a love interest made sense for Rory for what she was going through. So it's kind of like looking at Rory and her evolution and seeing Logan not necessarily as like a separate character, but sort of symbolic of what Rory's experiencing. The proposal definitely does feel like something that was like just shoved in for the sake of drama for me. And I don't know. I mean, it's fine, but I feel like it's just, to me, it did kind of feel like very tropey that anytime a show wants to introduce something spicy or exciting, it adds in a wedding or a pregnancy or an engagement, and people get married or engaged super fast. So it did kind of feel that way to me. I don't know if this is an unpopular opinion or not, but I really disliked Lorelai's attitude towards Jess. Like, yes, she did defend him, but I think her constant criticizing of him in front of Rory influenced her daughter in not publicly acknowledging her feelings for Jess. I find Lorelai's attitude really childish because I feel like she sort of put herself on the same level as him, which I do not remember seeing her doing with other children, teenagers of the show. We clearly see her despising Jess in front of Rory during the revival when Jess is in his 30s, which I consider really unfair. So I have seen this opinion kind of expressed before that people don't like that Lorelai hated Jess so much. And I think that this opinion kind of hinges on how you view their interaction at her house. So I guess to recap really briefly, Lorelai invites Luke and Jess over to her house in order to make Jess feel more welcome. He comes over, he takes a beer from her fridge, and when he's on the balcony, she's trying to kind of relate to him, tell him that, hey, you're going to love it here, you're going to love Luke, he's great. And he's like, what, are you sleeping with him or something?
What, are you sleeping with him or something? You're either really naive or you're getting some.
And this is where Lorelai goes off.
Excuse me?
And I think that there are several elements to how Lorelai feels. So first, when she first meets Jess, he's kind of laconic. He doesn't really say much when he meets her. And so that's her first interaction with him. Then she kind of tries to make him more welcome. Should she have done that? I think that's another conversation, which I'll get into. But so her impression is that this is a 17-year-old that went into her fridge, grabbed her beer, and then accused her of sleeping with her friend. And I think that an adult could reasonably dislike a kid for that going forward because first impressions I think are very strong. So, and I think it also depends on what the relationship is between the adult and the child. And I think that because the relationship between Lorelai and Jess is very tenuous, yes, Lorelai is friends with Luke and she does kind of like Luke, but I think it's like, well, this is your friend's nephew. If you have a kid that goes into your fridge, grabs your beer, and then accuses you of sleeping with their friend, if you don't have a reason to like this kid, you would have a bad impression of it. I kind of see Lorelai's reaction to that scenario making sense because it's a kid talking back to her, even though I do think Lorelai in that scenario could also be questioned because he was forced into this interaction. He didn't want to come over. It was her decision to make Luke and Jess come over, and her conversation with him is in some ways I feel like could be interpreted as patronizing because she's trying to relate to him, but in a way her line of saying,
I've also done the chip on my shoulder bit, and the surly, sarcastic, the world can bite my ass bit, and let me tell you, I mastered them all in heels yet.
Almost feels like she is diminishing Jess's experience. And I mentioned in one video that Jess and Lorelai, had their own childhoods and hard parenting, but it's different. They had different parenting. Going back to the point is that I could see why Lorelai got a bad impression of Jess, and she had no incentive to start liking him until Rory was like, please, can you give Jess a chance? And so Lorelai then does give Jess a chance. She lets him clean the gutters, but sadly that chance with Lorelai is ruined because what she sees is that Jess went into Rory's room and then later suddenly Rory found her bracelet. So we as the audience know that Jess didn't steal the bracelet. He saw it on the ground. He found it. But from Lorelai's perspective, this is a kid who has already been known for stealing stuff. And he was in Rory's room where he shouldn't have been. And then later Rory finds the bracelet. So it's sort of like a compounding effect. So I sort of understand where it's like she had a bad first impression. then this happens, and she has no reason really to like Jess other than the fact that he's Luke's nephew. So I understand where Lorelai's coming from. The revival, I have to be honest, I don't remember those scenes. So I do think that it comes to a point where, Lorelai is still holding a grudge against Jess would be unjustified. I don't remember the scenes of her disrespecting him in the revival, but I just simply don't remember. So if that's the case, I would say, yeah, it seems kind of harsh. Another unpopular opinion is that Lorelai didn't talk to Rory because she wanted Rory to go back to Yale. She stopped talking to Rory because she couldn't accept the fact that her daughter was not perfect. Lorelai was determined to raise the perfect daughter, and she wanted to do that by the exact opposite of her parents. So the dropout storyline happened because she couldn't accept the fact that despite everything, she still ended up with a flawed daughter. So this opinion makes sense to me, and I kind of had the same impression that it wasn't, obviously it's not just specifically tied to Yale, but it's the Lorelai, I think, does have expectations for Rory, and we see that Rory's not meeting those expectations, and Lorelai just feels this crushing disappointment that Rory's not doing what she had hoped that Rory would do. And this is also kind of similar to her parents, and I think kind of similar to a lot of parents, where it's sort of like Lorelai's parents put expectations on her, which she didn't meet, which led to disappointment, and then Lorelai put expectations on Rory, which she didn't meet, which led to disappointment. So yeah, Yale is symbolic of Lorelai's expectations. Jason Stiles was a great fit for Lorelai. I love them together. Also, Jess sucks, and the only right answer is Logan, and Rory should have accepted his engagement, especially considering a year in the life. I really like Jason. I made a whole video on him. I think that he was really funny. I don't know if I feel like they would have worked in the end, and I think my final conclusion on Lorelai and Jason, even though I really like Jason, is that I kind of have trouble seeing Jason fitting into Stars Hollow. I also think that Lorelai seems to have more of a laid-back lifestyle than Jason. Jason seems to be more of a workaholic. So I think primarily because of those two elements, the not quite fitting into a small town and the workaholic energy that Jason has, I think kind of make them a little mismatched. But I did like their dynamic. I thought that they were fun together, and I think that Jason's just a really fun character, and he was good at communicating, and he was very open in expressing how he feels about Lorelai, so I really like that aspect. The Jess sucks and the only right answer is Logan. I think that's just purely opinion. I think there's no right answer at the end of the day because, we could imagine a new character for Rory. We don't have to be restricted to someone who has an overactive imagination. We don't have to be restricted to the characters that were presented. There's Paul, poor Paul, but we could imagine a whole other character for Rory that could have been better suited than all of them, or we could say none of them, which is my opinion. Yeah, so I think it's just all preference at the end of the day. So when it comes to the engagement, should she have accepted it? I think, yeah, when we look at a year in the life, factoring that in, then the engagement, I think she should have said yes to if she kind of ends up with him in her 30s and she still wants to be with him. So I don't know if this is unpopular, but Lorelai is a bad mother. She treats Rory like a friend more than a child. She was not ready to have a kid, obviously, at age 16. And her parenting had a severely negative impact on Rory. On my first watch of Gilmore Girls, I couldn't believe people liked Lorelai because, in my opinion, she was just not a good mother and set Rory up for failure. So, very strong opinion. Love to see it. I don't quite feel the same way, and I guess partially because this show has so many bad parents. It feels like almost every parent on the show is a bad parent. Mrs. Kim is overly harsh. Paris's parents seem really crappy. Tristan's parents, Logan's parents, Jess's parents. It's nonstop bad parenting on this show. With Logan, his mom doesn't even show up when he's in the hospital in critical condition, and I cannot imagine Lorelai doing that. So when it comes to Lorelai, my impression is that she definitely makes mistakes as a parent. She makes sure that Rory's fed, that she's sheltered, that she's warm, that she's not in serious pain, basic requirements, but also that she's loved and that she feels loved, which is absolutely so fundamental for children to feel like they are loved, that their parent is there for them, that they're cared for, that they can talk to their parent. And I feel like Lorelai keeps an open line of communication. Rory's not the most open person and she doesn't always share things, but Lorelai, I think, tries to tell Rory that she should be able to talk about things.
I don't want you to stay with Dean because of me.
I know.
I think that the previous commenter had a good point about how the fact that Lorelai was criticizing Jess, which led Rory to be less open about Jess. So there are times where I feel like Lorelai hinders her own intentions, where her criticisms prevent Rory from openly sharing things. So I do think that because Lorelai makes sure that Rory's basic needs are met and that she's loved and that she's cared for and that she should be free to share her opinion and voice her opinion. Again, Lorelai is not perfect on that. I think she fails. For example, with also Yale, but I think that her intention is there. When it comes to this idea that Lorelai treats Rory as a friend, she does, but I think that Lorelai pulls the mom card quite often. And to me, I get this impression that the show sells you on this idea that Lorelai and Rory are friends first, but looking at it, it feels like Lorelai's almost playing a friend while being a mom underneath, and she's sort of masking her mom role as a friend, whereas deep down, a lot of her actions are very mom-like. And I kind of get this impression, I mean, the pilot kind of, I think, sets the foundation for that for me personally, where, they're friends, they're buddy-buddy, they talk about things like lip gloss, but then when Rory doesn't want to go to Chilton, Lorelai's like, no. And, she says, I'm putting my foot down, you are going to Chilton. And it just seems like Lorelai acts very mom-like quite often. So did she set up Rory for failure? And I feel like we have to give some autonomy and some, I guess, agency to the child itself. It's not always 100% the parents that establish how the child is going to do later. Again, there are certainly a lot of mistakes that I think that Lorelai makes, but not enough for me to put her in the bad mom category. There is one thing where I would put Lorelai in the bad mom category, and I think everything else for me kind of seems like peanuts, but this one thing is where I'm like, nope, this, I think I would argue, yeah, no, you are not good. And that is the food. My biggest unpopular opinion is that Emily was a better mother to Lorelai than Lorelai was to Rory. For me, it's kind of hard to compare the two. Emily is already an adult. We don't see Emily raising a child. I mean, we do see some flashbacks, but for me, it's not enough to really compare them. And we mostly see Emily interacting with Lorelai when they're both, grown adults. So I think it's a little bit different. The one thing that I would have to go back and really rewatch a lot more of Emily's scenes. I haven't really done that. But the thing that I find a bit troubling about Emily as a parent, the manipulation. There are a few examples of where Emily schemes a lot. Emily's a schemer. So one example is where Lorelai invites a blind date for Lorelai and she doesn't tell her anything, so it's kind of a surprise. She does that a few times. She also gets a blind date for Chris. It doesn't say anything. She also tries to set up a matchmaking party for Rory, invites a bunch of guys, whereas Rory's made to believe that this is like an alumni party. So maybe I'm forgetting some examples, but there are a few examples where Emily is scheming. And if this was done while Lorelai was a child, I could just see that having a very negative psychological effect on a child where you feel like you are kind of tricked into things, or things being concealed and you're being deceived. Oh, and so I guess another example is where Emily gets Christopher to come to the wedding because she wants Lorelai to get back to Christopher while Lorelai's with Luke. So in those scenarios, I just feel like growing up in that type of environment, if this was how Lorelai grew up, right? Theoretically, this is a fake show. But if Emily's scheming was a consistent through line from early on in Lorelai's life, I could just see that really, really damaging to a person growing up. You become super distrusting, you have issues, you just can't put, faith in anybody. So, whereas I don't see Lorelai being sort of actively deceptive towards Rory. Does she have harsh expectations? Does she not always listen to her? Yes, but this deceptive thing, I feel like could really fuck with a person. So, my unpopular opinion is that Lorelai treats Luke terribly and they are not in an equal relationship. He brings out the bitchy side of her. He is a safe choice. And I think if I were in her position and her age, I may have chosen him as well. He's very reliable and nice and kind, but she will always dumb herself down to be with him and he will always be a puppy to her. My second unpopular opinion is that Logan and Christopher are not the same at all, and people who always put them on the same level for Rory and Lorelai respectively are also not seeing how different Rory and Lorelai are fundamentally as people. What they want, value, and their ambitions are different. It's not just that Chris is a rich kid, Logan is a rich kid. Logan is very entitled and is very much cushioned by his family fortune, which Chris wasn't as much at that age and even later. All right, a lot to unpack there. Okay, so I guess the first part is Lorelai treating Luke terribly. I guess this is another one where I think I might have to go back and rewatch their relationship together. I guess based on my memory, I didn't get the impression that Lorelai was treating Luke terribly when they were together. I wish I was more informed on this one. She might. I guess I would have to go back and look at that. In terms of the other point about Lorelai and Luke, that Lorelai dumbs herself down to be with Luke. And I think this is also another mini controversy in the fandom, I think, where people feel like Luke has been dumbed down over time. Yeah, I guess that's a hard one for me. I'm not sure. Like, so does Lorelai dumb herself down? And is Luke a match for her socially and mentally? Well, she does come from a different world. Whether or not she's smarter than him, they might have different types of intelligence. And to the point about Lorelai choosing a safe choice. So I could also see that possibly as an argument. I think where I guess maybe disagree or kind of have a different perception or interpretation is that I think the show doesn't want us to view him as a safe choice. So I think that like based on what we see on screen between their interactions, one could argue the fact that, well, Luke does seem like a very safe choice because he's reliable. Christopher is more mature, but Luke is a lot more dependable. And so he does seem to be a safe choice, even though he may perhaps be not so, I guess, stimulating in other ways. But I think the impression that I get is that the show is presenting this narrative that Lorelai's choosing him because she loves him so deeply, that she's had these feelings for him from the beginning, and these feelings don't stem from the fact that he's safe, but because she just has this crush on him, that she likes him, they've been friends. So I could see this interpretation, but I feel like the show wanted us to believe that she likes him because of the feelings that she's developed of him over time, and not because she sees him as a safe choice. All right, and so the Logan and Christopher analogy, I think that it's an oversimplification. So I think that if a lot of, maybe I'm wrong, but if a lot of fans were to look deeply at Christopher and Logan, they would see a lot of differences, specifically, as you said, as it relates to how different Lorelai and Rory are, because Lorelai and Rory are very different. So is it fair to compare their love interest when the primary person is different fundamentally? I mean, I could see that one could still say the love interests are similar types, even though the primary people are very different. And so their relationships may be different, not because of the love interest, but because of the primary individual. So I haven't really formed an opinion, to be honest, about how I feel about Chris being compared to Logan. But I do agree with you on your point about where you say that where Logan has been cushioned a lot more. It is presented on the show that Logan is like very, very wealthy. He's much richer than the Gilmores, and he's richer than a lot of the upper class people. They are really at the top. So they are significantly more rich. And at that point, when Chris was college age, he wasn't at home. It seems like he broke out on his own and he wasn't really being supported by his parents. So it does seem like Christopher wasn't as cushioned growing up. Christopher is not the devil incarnate. I actually like some of Lorelai and Christopher moments. Yeah, I also don't think that Christopher is the devil incarnate. I actually didn't know that the fandom hated him so much until I actually started looking on Reddit. So to be honest, I would have to go back and rewatch all of the Christopher scenes to have a well-formed opinion. But just off the top of my head, I don't have a hatred for this character. But this takes me to the next point. Here's my biggest unpopular opinion. Christopher actually isn't the villain he's made out to be, and his behavior at the wedding renewal was an outlier. Also, he and Lorelai have better chemistry and work better as a couple than Lorelai and Luke. So I agree on the chemistry. I liked the chemistry between Lorelai and Christopher more. Was he better suited, or I guess as you put it, worked better as a couple than Lorelai and Luke? Um, for that, I would have to go back and rewatch their scenes because I think chemistry is not enough. And maybe perhaps if the kids were not in the picture, so if Rory didn't exist, if Gigi didn't exist, then perhaps Christopher and Lorelai could have worked. So the jury is out for me on that one, but I would agree on the chemistry. I freaking hate Logan. I wish he was just a college romance or the kind of romance that Rory could learn from to see what she doesn't want, but thought she did. Seriously, I hate everything about Logan, even when he's supposedly better. Here's my feelings on Logan. Initially, when I saw his scenes, when I watched seasons 5 through 7, I didn't like the character that much. When I did my video on Rory and her relationships, I developed a lot more sympathy for Logan. And now I'm sort of in a neutral place when it comes to Logan, so I don't hate him. I have more sympathy for the character because I think there's a way to look at Logan that's very sympathetic, I think, and a way that's less sympathetic. So I think that his backstory, while we get a little bit of it, could be viewed through different lenses, and the way that you look at his backstory could influence how you view this character. So I have chosen, I guess, the more sympathetic route, and I have more sympathy for this character. I don't have that much hatred, but I also initially did not like the character. My unpopular opinion is that Logan is the only boyfriend who loved Rory, alongside her flaws. Dean and Jess were not in love with her. They were obsessed with her, obsessed with the idea of her. It's a tough opinion because we have to get into this question of what is love, right? And how do we even define that? And how does that change? And is it viewed differently in different people? So, because love is just such a amorphous, undefined term, I think it's hard to just get into this opinion and say flat out, yes, they were loved, yes, no, they weren't. And again, these are fictional characters. So There is some evidence to suggest, or I guess there's a little bit of an impression that Jess and Dean did put Rory up on a pedestal. I feel like there's also evidence that Rory spent time actually connecting with them. So, it's shown that Rory and Jess have a lot in common. They have conversations, they have things that make them attracted to each other. That Jess didn't like just the idea, but he actually liked spending time with Rory. And early on, it does kind of seem to suggest that Dean truly liked her as well. I think there's a more of a pedestal effect with Dean. I guess I think it's for me, it's hard to just strongly say Logan truly loved her and the only one who saw her flaws. I don't know. I think Logan was kind of toxic because he always invalidated Rory's feelings when they disagreed. To be honest, I don't remember. So I'm trying to remember Logan and Rory's arguments. I know they fought once when Rory got upset at Logan, sort of putting on him the fact that all they do is drink. They go out. They don't, do anything responsible. I don't really remember what he says that invalidated her feelings. I think the other arguments that they've had is about, their breakups. So another case where I think I would have to analyze the fighting scene specifically, and off the top of my head, I feel like I don't recall a time when he was invalidating her feelings. Yeah, that's a tough call for me. I can't quite say either way. All right, so I guess that's my reaction to all your unpopular opinions. So this was a very different video. I'm not used to this, but if people like this, I will do more of these more often, or I guess more casual type of conversations. And let me know what you think.